We're joined now by the Dalit activist who gave Jack Dorsey the poster. Sanghapali Aruna is the executive director of Project Mukti, an NGO combating what they call caste apartheid. Sanghapali, thank you very much for joining us on The Newsmakers. Tell me briefly the context within which you gave that poster to Jack and why you gave it to him.
So I was basically invited for this event because I had been working with the Dalit and minority communities here in India. And when I was invited, I wasn't sure what exactly this closed door meeting was all about. But once I went there, I came to know that they wanted to know that, what kind of threats and what kind of problems or challenges that women in India are facing on Twitter platform. So for me, as an activist, as a tech activist, and as a Dalit activist, I and my friends have been working on bringing tech equity. So this poster was one of the messages that we wanted to take forward about smashing Brahminical patriarchy that not only exists on the ground, but also happens to be very much prevalent on these social media platforms. So I gifted this poster just to make the Twitter team understand what kinds of challenges we as minorities or marginalized communities face on these platforms.
And for those viewers who know nothing about who a Brahmin is, what Brahminical patriarchy is in your eyes, what is it and why do you need to smash it?
So for viewers who don't know what Brahmin is, so our India has been divided into, Indian society has been divided into a social order, which has Brahmins on the top based on their what they call it, the people who created it. In the terms of Manu or the Brahma, it says that the people who are intellectual were born from the head, the brain of the Brahma. So that's the reason they have the authority to read the Vedas, or they had the authority to rule anybody, and they had sanctioned many rules and many rituals for the others. So they were close to divinity, and the rest of the people who were placed below this order, whether it is Kshatriyas or Vaishyas, they were also called Dvijas, who were born twice and had access to the divinity. But the people who were born below these three categories, which were called the Shudras, were not considered pure enough to be close to the divinity. They were mostly engaging in jobs which were like working in farms for the others or working in their homes. So these were like not intellectual jobs which were considered by the others. So these categories were created by the Brahmins in order to have the topmost level only to them.
Right. And so in the long and the short of it, in the year 2018, in democratic India, the biggest democracy in the world, are Dalits at the bottom of the pile, if you like, treated terribly by Brahmins who are considered at the top of the pile?
So to make one point clear, I would say that Dalits were never featured into this category that I just mentioned.
They didn't even
Brahmin,
qualify.
Kshatriyas. Right. Yes. So they were called the Avarnas. So they were outside this caste system. So they were considered untouchables. So after a long fight by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, we were considered as equals in the constitution. So that is how we got education. We got access to schools, or whether it is to administration or in politics or anything. But considering that it's been only 57 years that we have got independence and we have got access to these resources. So for us, because we have got reservations, the affirmative actions that were given to us, because we were denied education, we were denied land, we were denied every resource that India had. We got education now. We got into schools, we got into colleges, but at the same time, the affirmative action is not being properly implemented in any of these fields. So you don't see any Chief Justice of India, heading at this moment, or you don't see any. Yes. So all these topmost positions are still headed and had only the upper caste people all throughout.
Understood. Yes. Okay. And this is why I guess there's a perceived need for a protest. Let's broaden out the discussion now with Sankrant Sanu from Bengaluru, India. He's an author and columnist for Entrepreneur India magazine. And in San Francisco, we have Dalit activist Thenmozhi Soundararajan. Thanks both of you for joining us. Sankrant, so we heard some context and some background from Sanghapali Aruna. This is a protest. This is an opportunity to give it to Jack Dorsey to engage with a provocative idea, perhaps, but it's punching up. It's punching up at power and patriarchy. Do you have a problem with it?
Well, I think the fact that they are having a protest and making their voice heard is absolutely fantastic. So I don't think anybody could have a problem with that. And just like any other society in the world, India has also had social inequality. So people who are working to break that barrier, I would definitely commend them. Now, the question about Jack himself holding up this poster, I do think is inappropriate. And it's mainly inappropriate because, Jack represents a corporation which is providing a social media platform in which a number of these debates can and should take place. So it's as if, he would go to Turkey and hold up a poster saying, smash Islamic patriarchy, or go to Rome and saying, smash church patriarchy. I mean, I think there are legitimate reasons why one could raise those issues, but I don't think it's appropriate for Jack to be holding up that poster.
Right. Twitter did a reversal, and in a way, this discussion, I don't want it to go down that road where we discuss whether kind of Twitter should have got involved, and they did their reversal, and they said, we're sorry, and so on, because we don't have a Twitter rep on the discussion. But Sankrant, some people went so far as to say that this was incitement to violence. Do you share that view?
Well, it has definitely happened that there has been violence, both definitely against Dalits who have been the majority sufferer of it, but also there has been violence in the other direction. So choosing our words carefully and important. I'll give you one example. There was a person, Perrier, who was one of the inspirations for this anti-caste movement. And so he was asked, he said, why do you hate, the Brahmin or the Brahminism? My reply is the Brahmins, and it is the Brahmins who should be annihilated. And then he goes around and compares the Brahmins to Jews, saying just like Jews were clever and they held on to resources, similarly Brahmins should be annihilated. Right. So this kind of language has been used by hate groups, and it has been used to physically target people as well.
Right.
So I think it's important that we choose that carefully and make sure that our cause is being further than not an incitement to hate.
Yeah, there's an interesting subplot here with the author Advaita Kala and politician Manish Tiwari claiming Brahmins are the sort of Jews of India, and that's been fascinating to follow. Thenmozhi, let me bring you in here because you designed the poster. So let me go right down to the source. When you designed the poster, what did you want to come out of it? What does smashing the Brahmin patriarchy mean?
Well, I think that, I just want to be very clear. There's only the most cynical interpretation that would allow for the discussion of a system of oppression to be seen as a slur against a community. It is an accepted practice with feminist movements around the world that when we want to talk about gender-based violence, we talk about the intersectional, interlocking systems of oppression that contribute to that. In India, you cannot talk about what is the violence that women are facing without talking about caste, because caste is one of the longest systems of oppression that have been ongoing in the country. Every hour, 3 Dalits are murdered, 2 are raped, and 2 houses are burnt. There's violence on both sides in terms of this argument. Dalits did not write or create the scripture that determined the caste system. Dalits do not benefit from the privileges of caste. And in fact, we are dealing with an ongoing system of violence and atrocity that is not spoken about outside of Indian borders because of this culture of impunity. This is why I made that poster, because for people who are interested in the issues and the human rights problems within the Indian context, we need to have pieces of art that help create empathy and bridges to the battles of Dalits and other caste-oppressed faiths who are talking about their experiences of violence, not just on corporate platforms, but in real-life contexts as well. And you have to keep in mind that in the context of the Modi administration, we have seen an instrumental rise of atrocities against Dalits, Muslims, and Christians. And that has been embedded by a culture of violence and a culture of trolling on these platforms. And I think it's a real dangerous thing for Twitter to have gone down the tangent of this faux caste scandal, as opposed to focusing on what the real issue at hand, which is the issue of online safety and that of Indian minority and women and journalists who are saying the culture of violence has to stop. And when we are seeing the kinds of troll attacks that we are seeing in the Indian context, it is unprecedented. Right. In the last month alone, we have seen the BBC, we've seen the Embassy of Sweden, and we've seen Twitter all be targets of the same kind of violence that Dalit women are the canaries in the coal mine for. Right. And it has to be dealt with structurally. And I think the big problem, which Sanghapali raised in her meeting, is right now Twitter has no way to account for caste violence on its platform because it doesn't allow for the reporting of caste. Right. So I'm not really going to dignify whether or not it is oppressive for a Dalit to talk about the system of oppression. I want to get to the source of the problem so we can make the atrocity stop. Well,
and that's a healthy reminder that the very reason Jack held that meeting was because he was speaking with women who receive abuse online. Sankrant, Thenmozhi makes a very compelling argument. Are you inclined to side with her?
I think her argument would be better if she didn't resort to exaggeration. For instance, she calls BBC as a target of violence. Now, what exactly was the story with the BBC? BBC put up a report. There was a counter argument. Another portal pointed out factual errors in the report. And now if that is turned into a narrative of violence, we have a real problem because we are saying any debate or free speech can now be turned into violence. And what that does is actually take away from real problems. It takes away from the real problems that
I would argue that there is a real problem here. Let me just finish. No, I would argue that when we're seeing journalists murdered, we're seeing journalists murdered, but because of hate speech on the platform, when we see Gauri Lankesh murdered from Bangalore, where you are based, because of the hate speech that we're seeing, we do have a real problem. There is real violence. This is why the women who met in that meeting were talking about not fictional violence. They were talking about rape threats. They were talking about threats. And we have seen the resignation of 3 editors from 3 major news outlets in India from this violence. This is not fiction. This is reality. So, and we're not talking about it in a structural way where the platform is actually taking accountability for the hate speech and disinformation that is happening on the platform.
Okay, so Sankrant, it's not just words. Go ahead, Sankrant. It's not just words. People are being killed.
If you have to remember, India is a very, very large country. In fact, India's population is bigger than all of the continents, either one of the continents other than Asia. So it's 1.3 billion people. So when you hold up a statistic like one person is killed here, it doesn't give you the context of what is happening and what is happening. And I think social media has actually encouraged this. Social media has encouraged a vibrant debate of many, many different sides. And yes, when I write, I get trolled. There's certainly women who are standing up, let's say, for a Hindu cause that get trolled, or people who are writing trolled. So there is trolling across the place. But I think it's unfair to characterize it as one side. I could give you a whole list of violent incidents, for instance, where
fair enough, Sankrant. And I apologize if I have to interrupt you here, but we are out of time. Sanghapali, We started off the discussion with you and I want to end it with you. You top and tail us here. Let's bring it all together. Let's circle back to the beginning. Is this all going to make a difference? We're having this discussion on an international network coming out of Istanbul now to the entire English-speaking world. Is a difference going to be made by having this discussion?
Right. So for us, the basic thing is about talking about these platforms which have been existing on this society for almost like more than 10 years, and they have never actually thought of addressing caste as one of the criteria to be reported. So many of the cases have gone missing because we couldn't actually report these cases on these platforms. So if these platforms have been playing a major role in perpetrating violence by not listening to the voices that are actually being affected by this violence online, I believe that this conversation should at least trigger, and at least Facebook and WhatsApp and Twitter listen to these conversations and try to address the hate speech and disinformation that are being targeted towards our communities on everyday basis. And for this matter, I had actually deleted my account 2 years back, both on Facebook and Twitter, because the violence did not stay on these platforms, but it actually was perpetrated as a physical violence who came back to me on my campus and then questioned me, and there was a physical argument. So in order to survive, in order to save my own self and also the movement, I had to quit. So this comes from my own experience that I'm talking. And when I put this forward in front of whether it was Facebook or Twitter, it was basically not for myself, but for our communities, which are being a target on everyday basis, and not just targeted, but actually being lynched based on the disinformation.
Okay. Listen, Sanghapali, Sankrant and Thenmozhi, it's been fascinating talking to all of you. I have to move on, unfortunately, but I thank you very much for joining us on the Newsmakers.